Welcome to the Risk Management course. I am Dr. Bill Perkins. Today we're going to explore Chapter 1, Fundamentals of Business Continuity Management. And this lecture is based on the material from the textbook, Business Continuity and Risk Management, Essentials of Organizational Resilience by Kurt J. Engemann and Douglas M. Henderson. So we're going to get started. So first we're going to go over Chapter 1's objectives. We're going to define business continuity management, which is otherwise known as the acronym BCM. We're going to define the relationship between BCM and risk management. We're going to review BCM responsibilities. We're going to identify BCM benefits, costs, and the commitment required. We're going to examine the BCM development process. We're going to review the use of a project management approach within BCM, and then we're going to review the data collection process for BCM, and we're going to present an overview of professional standards and terminology. We're also going to review the relationship between information technology and business continuity, and we're going to define green BCM. So think about the volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, or otherwise known as the acronym VUCA environment we have found ourselves in. Think of everything that's going on with COVID. Organizations that have not integrated contingency plans in their strategic plans or planning activities, they have faced significant challenges essentially in the areas such as sustainability or continuity of operations, otherwise known as ConOps for some of you. Business continuity refers to the actions taken to sustain and or resume operations impacted by crisis events. So in its frequent context use, business continuity also implies recovery, a common activity associated with the contingency operations. So as illustrated on this slide, business continuity management, or BCM, as it is defined, as a holistic management program that identifies potential events that threaten an organization and provides a framework for building resilience with the capability for an effective response that safeguards the interests of its key stakeholders, the environment, reputation, brand, and value-creating activities. And it is important to remember that resilience, a common term you'll hear throughout this course, is the ability of an organization to withstand the impact of a crisis event. Just going to leave this up for all of you note takers. Okay, moving along. So risk management, a major pillar in this course, consists of the processes of risk assessment, risk communication, and risk treatment. Risk management and BCM are sometimes mistakenly perceived as competing fields. However, risk management and BCM are strongly tied together, and viewing the fields separately can be obstructive to the holistic view and even prove to be a critical error in lengthier time horizons. So risk management tends to be a preventive, whereas BCM tends to deal more with consequences. Risk management processes provide important inputs for BCM and also deals with control for risks. On the other hand, BCM goes beyond risk management to plan for the inevitable disaster, utilizing business continuity and risk management in an integrated fashion is logical and viewed as very productive. So for successful business continuity management initiation, there are key factors for success. First, to communicate the need for a BCM program. Like every change, you need to establish a sense of urgency for buy-in and awareness. So you're going to need to communicate that need. You want to gain buy-in from the key stakeholders. You want to gain buy-in from your leadership. Next, you want to obtain support of senior management. And senior management are not only your lead change agents, but they operate at the strategic level of the organization. If you want to go back to your Management 101 course, you have your 3 levels. You have your tactical level of the organization. That's usually where the rubber meets the road. You have your operational level, which is the next level up. And that's essentially your operations management. And then you have your strategic level, which involves strategies and strategic planning. So they not only your lead change agents, being your senior management, not only operate at the strategic level of the organization, and continuity management initiatives need to be integrated into their plans. Those various plans, such as stakeholder plans, project management plans, change management plans, and like I said earlier, the strategic plans, because that's the level of the organization you're dealing with here. Next, establish a steering committee. And this is like every other strategy or change. You need that guiding coalition of agents. And it's needed to steer the planning, the integration, and the implementation of your plan. Next, you need to develop a business continuity policy statement. And that's essentially saying that, every strategy or plan like you have here, that needs a vision to drive it, okay? And that policy statement would almost act like a vision statement or a mission statement, driving everyone with that holistic lens of, what the change or what the, contingency plan or continuity plan looks like and how to get it realized. Obtain resources is your last one here. So no plan can come into fruition without resources to support the plan's implementation. Command and control infrastructures, information technology backup mechanisms, and a lot of plan Bs are needed for sustainability operations. So you're going to need to obtain resources and able to posture yourself for a successful contingency plan and business continuity. So many people associate risk with the measures one takes before an occurrence or contingency, when in fact risk is iterative, meaning that you constantly are going to be revisiting it throughout the contingency operations. You're always going to be engaged in some form of risk assessment or analysis. Business continuity management, as you will learn, will span across the continuum to deal with measures taken before, during, and after an event. Risk calculations and pre-positioning of continuity of operations mechanisms are in place before an occurrence, for smoother implementation when dealing with the unknown unknowns of a complex occurrence. Transitioning to after the occurrence, continuity management measures such as institutionalizing these new ways of doing business or integrating the lessons learned to transform those unknown unknowns now into known knowns. Okay. So the next time the organization is faced with a similar type of occurrence, it will facilitate more organizational sustainability, because now we are no longer in that complex domain of operations. We now are more maybe in a complicated domain of operations. Okay, think about COVID operations right now. So at first, to a lot of organizations, they were in that land of unknown unknowns, which would be more complex and for some maybe even chaotic to a certain degree. But now, if faced with a similar type of pandemic crisis, organizations now will have somewhat of an infrastructure to work off of, which will now make it more of the land of known knowns. Okay, so you're no longer in the unknown realm. Um, and that will foster greater organizational sustainability due to the successful contingency operations. And that's only if these organizations engage into some type of lessons learned. Um, in their contingency operations, they actually are building a contingency plan from what they're learning now during COVID. This is where if they're faced with it again, that they'll have some kind of an infrastructure in place. So there are multiple purposes for business continuity management. BCM is used to prevent serious disruptions, if possible, and to mitigate the impact of occurring disruptions. BCM is designed to provide safety for people and the environment, minimize the interruption of operations, mitigate damages, maintain customer service standards, maintain quality controls, and reduce legal exposures and comply with regulations. And there are significant responsibilities associated with business continuity management. Furthermore, there are many challenges organizations face while adhering to or meeting these responsibilities. Now, communication of the benefits of BCM and communication of the risk associated with not having a BCM are primary challenges. In most businesses, the board of directors is an organization's highest management authority and has ultimate responsibility for the organization's performance. The board of directors must establish policies and objectives to ensure the organization's survival and fulfillment of its mission. Law imposes strict duties on directors because they exercise control and management over the organization. Now, internal control is the direct responsibility of the directors, and these duties apply to each director separately. Now, before any program can commence and be successful, a commitment must be secured from the highest level of the organization. Now, significant senior management level participation at the corporate level is needed to oversee the program. Sufficient authority and resources have to be allocated for the BCM program for it to be successful. A senior executive should act as a sponsor and a champion of the BCM program. And management is typically aware of the need for business continuity planning, but may need assistance in many aspects of the project initiation and management. So senior management should ensure that prudent precautions are in place to prevent or mitigate a crisis, with the primary emphasis being on having the organization prepared to respond to safeguard people. Fundamentally, senior management is responsible for protecting the organization. So senior management holds specific powers conferred by the authority of the board of directors and has the responsibility of managing the organization. Senior management is responsible to initiate and oversee business continuity management to ensure the organization's preparedness and resiliency for a broad spectrum of critical events. It is the responsibility of all employees of an organization to understand their role in the BCM and to actively participate as directed. So remember here, the board of directors has the responsibility of managing the organization. Senior management is responsible to initiate and oversee the business continuity management to ensure the organization's preparedness and resiliency for a broad spectrum of critical events. And it is the responsibility of all employees of an organization to understand their role in BCM and to actively participate as directed. So business continuity management should be partnered strategically with the organization to the most beneficial and effectiveness of the program It should be thoroughly and periodically evaluated. Okay. Now, there is a need for regulation to ensure compliance, and likewise, there is a need for industry standards to promote widespread implementation of the BCM. Now, by institutionalizing BCM with a policy, the organization is committed to providing continuous operation of all aspects of the organization under normal conditions and rapid recovery from disruptive events. And communication is a critical factor in obtaining support for business continuity management. So senior management should be aware of the dangers of not having BCM. So examples of disasters in relevant industries are useful in establishing the necessity of BCM and obtaining support. So highlighting actual incidents that could have been disasters is also useful. So think of our recent events. We're not short or lacking of any prime examples that we could share with our organizations or our leaderships. And leadership by storytelling or drawing connections to data are always effective in gaining your organizations and its leaders buy-in for gaining support for a business continuity management plan or culture. Research has revealed that a company experiencing a disaster can lose 75% of its business, and 80% of businesses experiencing a disaster that do not have business continuity plans or do not embrace BCM in their culture eventually go out of business. That's pretty significant. That's 80%. Now, thinking about recent events, especially with COVID, this was very evident in many of our local businesses and our business communities. So think about the stimulus packages that were, available for businesses. BCM had to span beyond the organization for some sustainment. The government stepping in to kind of facilitate BCM for organizations that didn't have it. They didn't have an integration. They didn't have contingency plans. Some of these are, mom and pop shops too. They, never really had to deal with contingency operations. So the government kind of had to step in and be the facilitator of BCM for many organizations. And just because an organization has a BCM integration in its plan, if it never trains, executes, or evaluates that plan, sometimes you're dealing with old information, and you've experienced so much change in technology and the tools and techniques that you're using that your plan is irrelevant. So there are many benefits to an organization to have a comprehensive business continuity management integrated into its strategies, plans, and mindsets. BCM decreases exposure, reduces downtime, secures assets, and improves security. The process of developing BCM improves employee understanding and provides cross-functional training. Also, BCM protects markets, provides legal compliance, and helps avoid liabilities. These are all the benefits of business continuity planning. A presentation to senior management should relate business continuity management to the organization's mission, explaining the risks to which the organization is vulnerable, and explain management's accountability and liability, and provide a foundation to develop a BCM policy. So essentially, you are giving them the why. Start with the why. Tell them, why it's important to have one. Not only are you going to stress the importance of having one for those who will intrinsically understand and want to do good for the organization, but you're also painting the picture of the accountability. So, you can get buy-in just because of the accountability of not having a sound BCM policy. Um, Giving them that why will help with the buy-in. Now remember, the institution of BCM will require a change in the culture and the change in mindsets for some organizations. Your change management approaches will require creating a sense of urgency for this change, and that will be accomplished with such a presentation. So this presentation is vital, to gain that buy-in from your executive level. Now, the cost justification of BCM is similar to the cost justification of a good insurance policy. So there is an initial outlay of a modest amount of money that will lessen the financial impact of a possible future crisis. Similar to an insurance policy, the financial benefit of the BCM must be viewed from a long-term perspective. BCM is not a vehicle that will likely produce a short-term return on investment. So no significant ROI in the short term. However, as with many other ventures, BCM must ultimately um, be a cost effective. It must be cost effective to remain funded. So, it's going to take a lot of revisiting, a lot of the constant buy-in's going to be very iterative, where you're going to be revisiting it and doing it often because it will cost the organization, and you're always going to have to substantiate the need for the cost. Many of the important benefits of the BCM are clearly important, but are difficult to measure, and that's another problem. So all these factors contribute to the challenge of securing a financial commitment from senior management for the BCM. And the cost of establishing and maintaining a BCM includes both initial and ongoing expenses related to the various activities and assets. And that includes developing BCM analysis and documentation, backup facilities and equipment. That's very significant because as your primary equipment changes, so does your backup equipment. If you need other facilities that you need to operate from, a lot of organizations recently engaged in teleworking, and they realized that that was a cost-effective measure. However, it took a lot of training. It took additional IT equipment to get there. So it's a constant revisit, and it's very iterative to revisit these strategies and implementations. So in addition, you have your organization assets dedicated to emergency response. You got to make sure everything works. You got to drill it. Physical improvements designated to mitigate damages. Training programs for employees. Exercise in the BCM program. The frequency you're going to have to do it. That's going to cost. Even, do you have to shut down operations? And shutting down operations may cost the organization while you're training and while you're drilling it. Time is money for some organizations. Maintaining the BCM documentation, okay? Because if you're operating in accordance with some kind of compliance or a standard, and you need to meet a mandate and be able to illustrate, that you met compliance within that mandate, that type of documentation, that's going to take up space somewhere, and it's going to cost the organization money. Also, we're back to insurance. So, yeah, you may need insurance for this. Now, business continuity management is not a short-term project that comes to completion, but rather it is an ongoing, continuous program. So the BCM should strive to determine and implement the most cost-effective strategies that accomplish the business continuity objectives. So as I stated earlier, identifying potential events that threaten an organization and provide a framework for building resilience with the capability for an effective response involves actions before an event, during an event, and even after the event. So the first priority of the BCM must always be the protection of human life, BCM must also have as a priority the protection of the environment. BCM enables effective decisions during a crisis. It minimizes loss. It facilitates timely recovery, and it maintains the organization's reputation. Because you can really, if you fail and you don't have a good contingency plan, depending on what type of business you're in, you can really kill your organization's brand. Especially if you deal with a lot of personal information. You don't want to shut down. I mean, think about financial lending institutions. You can just crush your organization's brand with a poor contingency plan that's ineffective at a time that you need it. So some of the best practices in the communities of business continuity management practice. Well, you have your continuous program, and that's a program that is agile and adaptable to move with the changes of the organization. Like I said, if you change even your operating systems, any of your information technology systems, your backup mechanisms need to change and correspond with them. It needs to be comprehensive across the entire organization. So in order for continuity of operations to be sustainable, it needs to span cross-functionally across the organization. And what I mean by that is if all the components of manufacturing, I'm just using this as an example, if all the components of manufacturing aren't moving synchronously, manufacturing will not sustain. So think about if you have certain areas or functions in the organization that need to move like a well-oiled machine, and one has contingency operations and the other one just shuts down completely, you're going to be missing resources, you're going to be missing key critical components, and all the other moving parts will have to shut down as well. So, and also too, when I mentioned cross-functionally, let's say if you have an accounting office that provides you your budget or another support function and they shut down, then you're going to be shutting down as well. You either know you had a contingency plan. If that section did not, then you can only work as in accordance with what that section can provide you as a resource. So unfortunately, you're going to be shutting down as well. You didn't know you were prepared. Also, prioritized by business needs. And what I mean by that is what the organization needs to sustain operations should be driving forces in any continuity plan. Next, we have current and tested. And what I mean by that is the business continuity strategies need to be tested for relevance and attainability. So with the turbulence of organizational change, continuity plans should be tested at great frequency for bolstering the organization's agility. Next, we have led by an empowered team. And for continuity of operations to become cultural, the team needs to be empowered to impose obligations cross-functionally throughout the organization for the development of corresponding operational plans, resources, and relevant stakeholder identification and engagement. And last, we have modifies event impact to an acceptable level. And what I mean by that is what could be a chaotic or complex event will now be downgraded to complicated when contingency plans and infrastructures are built to deal with these contingency operations. And that's some of your best practices. Now, we just spoke about the organizations that were doing it right. Not paying attention to those benchmarks and best practices will make an occurrence that would normally be complicated to be viewed as chaotic or severely complex, especially when organizations don't talk about or plan continuity of operations. So many of these challenges make it difficult for organizations to embody the gold standard approaches to business continuity management. So first, you got to think about communicate risk of not having a program. And organizations don't take the time or have cultural impediments to effectively communicate the risks. So you can have, like I said earlier in my example, you can have one section of the organization that is very agile, very adaptable. They have a great and sound contingency plan for business continuity. But if all the moving parts of the organization, some of those other cross-functional areas they collaborate with and they're dependent on, if they don't, and the organization does not have a sound communication plan or a communication strategy on how all these moving parts talk and communicate with one another, it's going to fail. It's going to fail hard, So it needs to span across the organization, especially cross-functionally. Um, Next, we have communicate the value of the BCM. And with that, we mean there are plenty of examples out there to illustrate the wins and the losses of the BCM. However, not enough strategic planners are leveraging those examples. And right now with COVID, you have a ton of examples out there. You have plenty of wins and plenty of losses out there. And with the turbulence of the change strategic planning has transitioned from being a 3 to 5 year undertaking. And that's going back to your Management 101 course, if you've taken that. That strategic planning traditionally was a 3 to 5 year undertaking, and now it's essentially done every year because of the turbulence of change that organizations face. Well, if that's the case, then the frequency in planning, contingency planning, and business continuity management needs to also correspond with that and move with a year-long frequency. Next, we have partner strategically with the organization. And what we mean by that is many organizations operate in silos. Okay. Business continuity management mandates that cross-functional collaboration, relationship building, and transparency. Next, we have evaluate effectiveness of the program. And what we mean by that is time management and dealing with a complex environment distracts organizations from the evaluation phase that should follow the design, the development, and even the implementation of the program. Next, we have need for regulations. And what we mean by that is many organizations will not engage in business continuity management strategies without the obligations being imposed on them with significant accountability. So with supply chain management and outsourcing being major components of organizational sustainability, we have witnessed the necessity of the sustainability of certain businesses and their reliance on other businesses for that sustainability. And we saw it a lot with COVID, where some organizations shut down because it wasn't necessarily because their own local operations shut down, was that their supply chain shut down. So they're heavily reliant on that. So when you go to plan contingency operations, you may have to have that plan B on how are you going to obtain your resources. Regulations can push sustainability through mandates and compliance. When you think about what we witnessed with the partnerships and the regulatory control measures when it came down to mask shortages during COVID. You had also people trying to price gouge with masks, and the government had to step in. You had organizations that normally don't design and manufacture respirators, coming forward and designing and manufacturing respirators. Next, we have the promote industry standards. Much like the need for regulations, standardizing continuity of operations is necessary in certain industries like healthcare, for example. Info sharing the best practices is necessary to span continuity of operations to more of a community resiliency rather than an organizational resiliency. More of the community of practice of healthcare, which will have a greater impact on society not just an organization, but society. So you're focused more towards the greater good, not just accomplishing a strategy. So the business continuity phases. 5 business continuity phases are the steps to be taken before, during, and after a crisis. And they include prevention, mitigation, response, recovery, and restoration. I'm going to leave this up here for you note takers. All right, moving on. So we're going to start with prevention. Prevention steps are designed to lessen the likelihood of a crisis or event. Next is mitigation. Mitigation steps are designed to make the impact of an event less severe. Next, we have response is the reaction of an organization to an event to address the immediate effects. Next, recovery is the stabilization and resumption of operations. Recovery is the stabilization and resumption of critical operations. And restoration is the process of returning to normal operations at a permanent location. Restoration is the process of returning to normal operations at a permanent location. So business continuity management is a program consisting of 3 major stages, being development, implementation, and maintenance. And as depicted here in figure 1.1, the program is continuous and cycles through these steps for the various entities of an organization. Now, development begins with senior management's commitment to a BCM program and involves the determination of business continuity strategies based upon an understanding of the organization. Senior management assesses organizational objectives and determines the critical products and services necessary to satisfy these objectives. The main components of development are first, we have program initiation that commences with a commitment by senior management to allocate resources and assign responsibilities for the BCM. Next, we have business impact analysis, BIA, and that identifies the importance of the organization's activities by assessing the impact over time of their interruption and establishes continuity and recovery objectives. So BIA establishes objectives before, during, and after crisis events and examines the infrastructure necessary to conduct operations. Next, you have risk assessment, RA. That begins with a systematic process of identifying events and determining their causes, probabilities, and consequences. RA then compares risk levels with established risk criteria. So RA and BIA are often conducted simultaneously. And next you have strategy development, and that determines the strategies needed to meet the response, continuity, and recovery objectives established during BIA, business impact analysis. Implementation involves putting the strategies in place, finalizing, documenting, and as necessary, activating the plans. And the main components of implementation are you have your emergency response plan, your ERP, and that defines the action steps to be taken to respond to hazard-specific crisis events with the prioritized objectives of life safety, environmental protection, and asset protection. Then you have the business continuity plan, the BCP, and that is the central plan documentation, and it documents continuity and recovery procedures for crisis events. The ERP and BCP are often developed simultaneously. Next, maintenance involves creating an education and awareness culture of BCM and ongoing testing, auditing, and change management to ensure the plans remain operable and current. So the main components of maintenance are, first, you have awareness and training, and that provides awareness to respond to crisis events and training to execute plans. Next, you have testing and exercising and assesses the viability of the plan. And next, you have maintaining and updating, and that ensures the consistency between the plan and the changes affecting the organization. And figure 1.2 here depicts how the BCM development process is implemented through a series of highly integrated projects. So business continuity management consists of numerous interrelated projects for which standard project management methodologies are most useful. Now, each project consists of data collection, analysis, documentation of findings and recommendations, management review and approval. Tasks that comprise a project, task duration times, precedence relationships, and dependencies need to be defined in order to plan schedules. Now, additionally, resources need to be secured in order to undertake each project. Now, project management software is beneficial in tracking changes, establishing and reporting on project progress, and making adjustments to meet the management direction. So every project has inherent risks of not fulfilling the intended objectives. Prior to initiating a project, it is very important to validate the expectations, evaluate the initial plans, to assess the feasibility of schedules and resources, and assess the project risk. A project manager should keep the project within scope, report variances in schedule and cost, update plans with management approval, validate the ability to meet revised goals, and reschedule or revise project as necessary, or a project plan as necessary. So BCM should use a comprehensive approach that is formalized through a detailed methodology, and that methodology should include methods of performing cost-benefit analysis, and methods of handling uncertainty and determining probability of rare events. So the methodology establishes the rationale to determine the control alternatives to be implemented in a holistic fashion. Project reviews are used to document task completions and to identify resource consumption. A well-designed methodology reduces the risk of project failure, and although some areas of an organization may have contingency plans, there is a need to have a consistent approach to business continuity planning across the entire organization using a standard methodology with articulated standards. Now, for proper project management and to maintain the scope baseline, ensure you are reporting to senior management the following. First, your objectives. You want to keep them SMART, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time-bound objectives. They help develop the project milestones, which will break down into the project activities. Next, you have assumptions. Assumptions help develop the risk management plan of a project plan in determining the probability and impact of a risk. Next, you have constraints. And as what we mean by them, the constraints are reporting constraints. What are the impediments going to be to the project? So you have to report these constraints, and that will help you with stakeholder identification, engagement, and management, because somebody's going to have to mitigate, or lift these constraints in some fashion. So that's going to help you with your stakeholder identification, engagement, and management. Next, you have budget and schedule. I'd like to keep these two together because any type of budget or schedule variance requires some kind of crashing efforts or contingency plans to meet the project objectives. And you're going to have to make adjustments. A lot of times, time is money, so a lot of times if you have to make adjustments to the schedule, that may increase the cost of a project because you may have to get more contractors involved. You might have to double your equipment on your focus areas. Usually time is money. And if you're running out of money, that's definitely going to affect the time of the project. Accomplishments, those are your key milestones, and they help diminish risk in accordance with the risk management plan. As you get past certain milestones, then risk in those concern areas, may no longer apply. So when managing change, remember that, keep the project within its scope, keep everything relevant and no scope creep. Make sure, other projects aren't creeping in, or, that you're controlling the scope to be in something that's attainable. Report the variances in cost and schedule. Changes in time and cost and scope are all interconnected. In fact, in project management, it's called the iron triangle. So you can't affect one without having to make adjustments to the others, as I explained in the previous slide. Next, you have to update the plan with management approval. Control changes, ensure these changes are updated in the plan. Next, you have validate the ability to meet revised goals. And again, that's why I said those goals really need to be SMART, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. And then finally, you have your reschedule, your revised project, and any revisions will update the schedule. It could affect the schedule. We're going to have to make scheduling adjustments. Next, for interdependent projects, the planner is responsible for several interdependent projects and keeping senior management informed. These projects are connected and dependent on the success of other projects being accomplished. So risk assessments involving probability and impact are vital to the success of these projects. So if the critical path of one project being accomplished involves a product that's produced by another project, the scopes, schedules, and budgets are also going to be interconnected. So if in one situation in which an organization opted to make a resource instead of buying a resource, and that is just to maybe bolster another project's budget. So maybe it was just cheaper, in being faced with a make or buy situation that they decided to make a resource. Well, if that project shuts down and you're no longer making that resource, but that resource affects another project, now you're going to have to purchase in that other project to obtain that, resource. So it's going to change. It might have changed the scope. It could also change the schedule, but it will certainly change the cost of that other project. So, that's why when I, foot stomped earlier about the interconnections of the organization and the cross-functional communication, it's vital whether we're talking about project management, even during simple times, but certainly during contingency operations. Next, the objective of BCM is to limit the impact of major disruptions to an acceptable level. This involves determining the criticality of organization functions, operations, and processes, identifying interrelationships and dependencies, identifying critical time frames, and determining exposures over time. Data collection is an important activity throughout the business continuity management process. So data are obtained from various sources, including from documentation, meeting, interviews, workshops, questionnaires, and inspections. Existing documentation such as organizational charts, flow charts, process diagrams, floor plans, engineering diagrams, financial statements, and inventory records provide much useful information. Distributing questionnaires can be convenient and inexpensive. Individual interviews with key personnel can be useful, but are also time consuming. Group meetings may provide more efficient means of collecting data. Site inspections are an integral part of the data collection process and are used to identify controls and exposures. So comprehensive checklists should be used to ensure that important points are not missed. Topics that should receive particular attention are facilities, operations, information technology, IT, controls, and procedures. So there are several organizations that have established professional standards and provided credentialing. At the international level, 3 of these organizations are the Disaster Recovery Institute International, and that's headquartered in the United States. You have the Business Continuity Institute and the Institute of Risk Management, both headquartered in England. Qualified professionals are used worldwide for their expertise in business continuity and risk management to ensure that the established standards are met. And there are other organizations that have established standards. The most widely recognized standards in the U.S. is the NFPA 1600 standard on disaster and emergency management and business continuity programs. And this standard has been established by the National Fire Protection Association. Then you have the American Society for Industrial Security, and it provides business and critical infrastructure with security standards, including the SPC 2009, organizational resilience and security preparedness and continuity management systems. The BS 25999 standard for business continuity management was developed by the British Standards Institution and is widely recognized internationally and within the United States. You have your HB 221-2004. And that's your business continuity management, and the HB 292 2006, a practitioner's guide to business continuity management, and both developed by standards in Australia, and they're widely recognized. In the United States, Congress has directed the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, to develop and implement a voluntary program of accreditation of private entities to promote preparedness and disaster management, emergency management, and business continuity. Now, the program is the Volunteer Private Sector Preparedness Accreditation and Certification Program. That is the PS-PREP. And there's 3 standards that have been adopted for assessing private sector preparedness as follows. You have your SPC-2009, you have your BS 25999, and your NFPA 1600. Now, the National Accreditation Board, the accreditation body selected by the Department of Homeland Security, it will oversee the certification process. The program will include a periodic review process, a public listing of accredited organizations, and there will be a special consideration given to small business. I'll leave these up here for your note takers. So the aforementioned certifying organizations and their corresponding certification framework, they stretch across the business continuity management continuum to include the program initiation and management, risk assessment, business impact analysis, developing business continuity strategies, emergency response, business continuity plan development and implementation, awareness and training, maintaining and exercise, crisis communications, and coordination with external agencies. So there's an array of essential activities that are associated with the BCM, and much of it, depending on your organization, may have some governance. So as organizations became increasingly aware that disruptions have a severe negative impact, the business continuity profession arose to management interruptions in IT and non-IT operations. So as the business continuity profession developed, business terminology was blended with IT terminology. Okay, so over time, the professional organizations have attempted to foster a more standard terminology to be used in BCM. Now, federal, state, and local emergency services have also developed terminology, much of which focuses on life-saving and emergency response. So government agencies use terms such as continuity of operations, sometimes because, of my military background, you'll hear me slip and say ConOps, continuity of operations planning, and continuity of government plans, rather than the business continuity plan. Okay, so essentially it's almost like the same thing, just different acronyms, different words being used. Sometimes the continuity of operations planning segments for a non-business entity are incorporated in the overall emergency operations plan or similar term. And colleges and universities may or may not adopt some of these related terms. Some of them are kind of creating their own language. And the continuity and recovery of information technology service is vital to every organization. Now, the term disaster recovery is generally used in the IT field to indicate business continuity activity, and IT disaster recovery planning is part of the overall business continuity planning and should be closely coordinated with business objectives. Information technology planning is completed by analysts with specialized training nowadays. And executives need to know the capabilities and limitations of IT disaster recovery plan. So activation of the IT disaster recovery plan as a result of a crisis event should return the organization's critical functions to stability and enable the continuity of those activities. So a comprehensive IT disaster recovery plan can be very expensive to maintain and execute. It is important for management to select the most cost-effective solution that accomplishes the established business continuity objectives. Now, executives and IT personnel both need to keep current on IT trends that are constantly changing. IT personnel need to be thoroughly versed in technical matters. And most importantly, senior IT management needs to communicate very technical matters in understandable terms for the other functional areas of the organization, especially since, you know, uh, you know, business continuity management is very, very collaborative when you look at it through an organizational lens. So you need to be able to speak in a language that everybody can understand. And senior IT management needs to be able to analyze and communicate both the costs and benefits of various IT solutions to the organization's business executives. Sustainability is a central theme in decision making for organizations pursuing long-term strategies. Green business continuity management is the conducting of the BCM program in a manner that is consistent with the objectives of reducing environmental impact, promoting sustainability, and conserving energy and other resources. So careful analysis is necessary to ensure that the implemented strategies do not have unintended consequences which are hazardous in some unseen fashion. And that concludes our lecture. This was the chapter 1 lecture, and check Blackboard for this week's expectations and deliverables, and I will see you in chapter 2.